In the previous chapter, Job walked us through what his life was like before the disaster of chapter 1 descended upon him. And it was a glorious life that he was living. He was honored and respected within his community. He was a figure of godly authority. He was a source of wisdom, and his insights were honored. But now, as chapter 30 begins, Job spells out a stark contrast. But now they mock me, men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. Job is talking about the scoundrels of his society, those who are genuinely disgraceful and dishonorable, and those people look down upon Job as though he is even worse than them. Job is still describing these kinds of people, where he says, verse 5, they were banished from human society, shouted at as if they were thieves. Again, can't you see some startling parallels between Job and Jesus? Jesus, lifted up on a cross, is humbling himself to the lowest possible place. Next to him, on crosses either side, there are what kinds of people? Thieves. Exactly right. Other people who are disgraceful and dishonorable and held rightly in low regard by the rest of society, and they turn to the innocent one, the righteous one, and what do? The same thing they did in Job's day. They mock him. What a remarkable thing that Jesus should find himself in such company, and in that moment they look down upon him as if he is worse than them. Matthew chapter 27 tells us, in the same way, as in just as the people passing by looked down upon Jesus, in the same way the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults upon him. How bizarre that Job should find himself in exactly the same situation as Jesus. Thieves in his society looked down upon him. They derided him. They mocked him. Job's suffering and miserable treatment points us forward to the Messiah, who likewise was looked down upon by everyone, but was literally, totally without sin, though they treated him with great scorn. Job feels like God has brought him low. In verse 11, he feels that God has unstrung his bow, that is, left without protection, and afflicted him. Again, understandable that Job would think this, but it's not quite accurate. God has not afflicted him, but he has allowed the affliction of Job by the hand of Satan. There is a difference, and it does matter. However, again, just think about the parallel account. If these words were spoken not by Job, but by Jesus, they would be absolutely true. As Isaiah tells us, surely he, that is Jesus, took up our pain and bore our suffering, and we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. It's the same word. Job says, God has afflicted me. Well, not quite. But Jesus could say, the Father has afflicted me, and that's true. That is what happened, because Jesus took the sins of the world upon his shoulders and received in his body the punishment that we deserve. Now, Jesus was not a victim, he was a volunteer. He willingly went forward to be treated like this in our place. But still, isn't it striking to read these words from Job pointing forward in ways that he can't imagine to the Messiah? In verse 13, he says, they succeed in destroying me. No one can help him, they say. Again, think of the words that people flung at Jesus while he hung upon the cross. He helped others, but he can't even help himself, they said. It's the same sentiment here, isn't it? And then in verse 20, Job cries out to God, but he hears only a deafening silence in response. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. You can hear the anguish in Job's voice, can't you? He doesn't doubt that God is there and that God knows and that God can hear, but the silence in response is shocking to Job. And again, if anyone could take these words and speak them with all sincerity, it would be Jesus. On the cross, in that moment of agony, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? On the cross, there truly was a terrifying separation between the Father and the Son. We know from 2 Corinthians chapter 5 that God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. We know from the book of Habakkuk that God's eyes are too pure to look upon such wrongdoing. As that beautiful hymn puts it, the Father turns his face away. Now, truly, Job was not abandoned. He was not forsaken. He was not left all alone. But Jesus, for our sake and by his own plan, he endured exactly that, being forsaken by the Father, because of the sin of the world placed upon him, which caused this agonizing separation. Job's suffering, though real and immense, was only a shadow of the suffering of Jesus. And seeing Job wrestle with his suffering up close and personal should cause us to come away with a greater understanding and a deeper appreciation for the Lord Jesus Christ, who placed himself in a position of significantly worse suffering. Yes, mocked, yes, beaten, yes, spat upon, mocked by men, but forsaken by the Father, receiving the punishment that we deserve so that we might enjoy peace. We ought to be so deeply grateful for Jesus that he would choose to endure such suffering for our sake. And because he was forsaken, we can be confident that we never will be. Because he was punished, we can be certain that we never will be. Because he rose on the other side of death, we know that we will too. And so thank God for his immense redemption plan, which guarantees our salvation.